Welcome to this summary video for creating the Heragul Peregrine miniature. I'm Jason, the creator of the Kalidasia universe, and in this fourth and final episode, we're going to take on the 3D modeling process for this miniature. And up to this point in the process, we've gone ahead and created concept art views for all the different sides of the warships, top, bottom, left, right, front, back, so on. Well, not left, just right, but regardless, those are details. And then we've gone in and take those plans, scan them in Adobe Photoshop, and created much more detailed ship plans. And in this magical world, those ship plans would allow you to do a very mechanical process here in Blender, which I'm using today to create a 3D model. Now, there's still some things I had to figure out, but because I had these ship plans to build a 3D model off of, this process of building the Heragul Peregrine inside Blender was much faster than any of the recent Heragul miniatures I've done in the past year or so. The key thing here when using Blender for 3D modeling for 3D miniatures is you want to take your ship plans and import them in as a background image into each of the views individually. So even though you can take the same image and go ahead and import it into all views at once, you need to import the ship plans separately, like I said, in the top, bottom, left, right, and so on, because what you need to do is adjust the positioning, rotation, and orientation of those images separately in each of the views, so that as you rotate your camera around in Blender, you see the mesh you're building appear in the right spot for that view. So it appears in the right spot when you're looking down on the top view, from the right, from the front, and so on. And there are plenty of detailed tutorials on the internet available if you want to know how to get this particular step done. From this point here, it's really about using only a very small subset of Blender's available tools to highlight vertices and move them around such that they match the positions in the 3D space where they match the positions on the various ship plans. So you drag them to match the top view, and then you drag them to the right place in the side view or the front view, and therefore that vertex is going to be where it should be for in the real 3D world. Now, when it comes to manipulating these meshes, like I said, you use a very small subset of what Blender has to offer. So things like extruding, where you basically take a side and expand it out. You have a knife cut, which allows you to kind of arbitrarily divide a mesh up and get more vertices. And also subdivide, which is another more cleaner, more mathematical way of creating extra vertices. But no matter what you do here, in the end, you're probably going to have a little bit of messiness to your mesh, because it's very important when it comes to 3D printing that the mesh you're creating is something that is actually a true 3D object. You can't have weird zero-dimension sides sticking out here. So you probably will have to do a few things where you delete some vertices or merge some vertices together to clean those things up. And you can see that here in this step, as I'm spinning the mesh around, something just looks odd to me. And you can tell there's probably like a little side sticking up that has a zero width to it. Things like that are what you want to look for to clean up, because those kind of artifacts, while they can exist in a 3D world, can't exist when you do a 3D printing. Also then in this view, you can see that I've got basically the entire back opened up as a result of some of this cleanup process I'm doing. That's also a big no-no, because you need to have a solid 3D object. So you have to, when you have this situation where you've kind of deleted some vertices for one reason or another, you got to go back in, highlight some vertices, press F on your keyboard, and create a face which seals them up. And you literally do this process again and again and again and again and again and again until you have a complete 3D model. It really, there's nothing hard to it. It's just doing the same thing over and over again. Now, like I said, in the magical world, your ship plans will produce a perfectly good 3D model. That's not the case. There's a few things here and there I had to sort out. Some areas in the back I had to sort out. Some of the front armor bands didn't quite work right, things like that. But they're relatively small fixes compared to the time I would have spent if I had to build this guy from the ground up just in Blender. I've done that before, and it's really kind of a waste of time. And now, finally, as you can see here, the final miniature, the last thing you have to think about is how big is this miniature. Blender doesn't actually work in real world sizes. It works in what's called a Blender unit. The idea is it's based on arbitrary measurement, because in 3D space, it doesn't really matter whether a one unit is a millimeter, a centimeter, or whatever. That only really matters when you translate things into the real world. So for example, in my case, I chose one Blender unit to be 1 millimeter. Now that's not entered anywhere into Blender. That when it comes into play when I go to the 3D printing step. And I know that I gotta tell my 3D printing software or service, whatever I'm using, that one Blender unit here, one unit of this measurement system is 1 millimeter, and therefore the 3D printer can then take my model and create a proper 3D object out of it. And therefore, when you're thinking about these things in terms of arbitrary measurements, you do need to pick a measurement ahead of time because there are constraints on 3D printing. Of course, 3D printers can only make things so small, and even when you can make things so small, there's a little bit of randomability to the size, and that can mess things up. But also, when it comes to a miniature that's eventually going to be cast and painted up, very small details that may be 3D printable can be lost because of too thick layers of paint. It really can happen. So even though you can make something really small in 3D printing, you may not necessarily want to do it that way. It's just one of those things that honestly requires a little bit of experience. That's why when it came to modeling this guy, I kind of did the sizing afterwards, because I know I got a pretty good feel of what 3D printers can and cannot do at this point. So I wasn't worried about exact sizing as I built the Peregrine miniature. So this is the first time you're creating a miniature. You may want to be precise from the start and actually, figure out exactly what a blender unit is at the start and know how big things are so that you can stay within the constraints of 3D printing and eventually just the constraints brought on by tabletop miniatures themselves. So with that, that's going to go ahead and conclude this series on making the Heragul Peregrine miniature. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments or want to learn more about the Kalidasia universe, you can head over to kalidasia.com/live. The URL is going to be sitting down there in the corner of your screen and also available in the show notes of this video. So with that, once again, I am Jason. Thank you for watching and have a good night.